my moves like my ABC.
Role-playing and rituals for heritage-oriented games, or at least what I was inspired to say by that Diagra talk title. World creation is a tricky beast, and is at the core of a conflict I mentioned in a previous video, the tension between the fantastical and the plausible. Nowhere perhaps is this more contentious than when it comes to rites, rituals, and religion. We want to create believable worlds and attitudes, and much of that stems from heritage, yet we often shy away from these aspects because they can offend and panic people. If the magic in our game stems from historical grimoires and traditions such as the Goetia, certain people will regard that as dangerous, and others as disrespectful, and other people won't care. If we incorporate the traditions of other cultures into our games because we find them appealing, we will be accused of cultural appropriation and disrespect, rather than the probably more applicable cultural appreciation. If you want veracity, you want to reference existing cultures, and we often see analogues of real-world traditions, if not the real-world traditions themselves, but these are rarely fully and comprehensively explored in games. Making up traditions and religions whole cloth is very difficult because the real things are often much more absurd than we could ever imagine. A cracker and a glass of rotten grape juice being magically transformed into the flesh and blood of a dead demigod for the purposes of a cannibalistic veneration? You couldn't make that up and get away with it, yet it's part and parcel of the Christian religion and not considered ghoulish or strange at all. You also can't help but get things wrong. The limitations of platforms, graphics, money, writing, the demands of the game, all of this interferes in the interpretation of traditions and rituals, and there's simply too much room to get things wrong. And that's even when you share a culture with the tradition you're drawing on. If you don't share that tradition, well, look at some Japanese anime and manga and how it often uses the Christian traditions that we in the West are familiar with. Some of that stuff is hilarious, and some of it, I'm sure, is deeply horrifying to genuine Christians. So what then? Can't win, don't try? Should we ignore rich sources of folklore, tradition, and ritual that could lend our games and stories authenticity and gravitas? Should we spend money we don't have on things we can't afford, like consulting with experts, and those experts will still be disagreed with? I mean, there's wars fought over different interpretations of religions. I'd say, I think, that you should follow your own path on this. As an atheist, these concerns are usually unimportant to me, and as a designer, it's more important to me to retain my artistic vision and integrity, rather than to mollycoddle anyone's feelings or beliefs. Any game is necessarily an abstraction, an artistic endeavour, and it involves inspiration. Being inspired by traditions to make something new is a complement to that tradition, to the more beautiful and interesting parts of that tradition. To make a good game, you'll often have to compromise in order to get a good story out of it, but when it comes to tradition and heritage, people don't like to compromise. Is your goal to tell a good story and make a good game, or is it to evangelize and, accurately as much as you can, represent that tradition? That's up to you, but for me, it's definitely the game and the story that have priority.